Welcome back to day 26 of our chess journey to 1500 ELO on chess.com. Let's jump on ahead into our browser here and find a game. So after our loss yesterday, we are looking to bounce back today and we will play our usual 1d4 here. We're going for the Queen's Gambit and they play the Alabin counter gambit. This is our first time encountering this gambit, and I think this might be the critical approach, because if they capture, we deny them any castling. We will have to look deeper into this afterwards. This would allow maybe this even, or the queen capture. So let's go for this. And here I'm not as certain as to what to do. If we go ahead and play this, they might have some way of holding onto this pawn. Alternatively, we might be able to play e3. What happens here? They would have this check, and we can't go onto this square, so we might have to play like this, and then they could probably capture, and then we can't hit their queen because of our bishop. They're not currently hitting any of our pawns, but they might just do so with this move quite soon. I think we'll just continue with normal development. I'll have to look into the theory after this game, but I'm curious as to what we should have played here. This might still be theory. This might be an option. What happens if we play this? They still have this check, and we have to move onto this square. Alternatively, I'm looking at a3 to deny them any shenanigans, but this might be a bit slow here. They can't develop this knight here. Honestly, this might be the best move, simply because it allows us to play this e3 move and hit their pawn. This is just based on intuition though, and I'm not seeing any concrete follow-up for them. No way to immediately threaten us. This pawn is defended. If we play a3 here, they can play up like this, or they could have been able to if we didn't have the capture move. So let's play a3 here and not spend too much time. This move also defends our pawn here on c4. What happens if they play bishop to e6? I think we would have our e3 move here, and I think we should be fine. They play a quick bishop to g4 here. Is this still an option? If we go for e3 here and they capture, they will get the open file. And we will not have captured their pawn yet. Let's have a quick look here. Here we might even have No, we have to address this pawn, so we have to recapture at some point. but this would allow this, which is not that good for us. This might open up our bishop, but then we will weaken our control over those two squares here. This is a tricky opening. I think we'll go on ahead and play this. And if they capture, we capture with the e-pawn, opening up our bishop and preparing an eventual castle. I'm expecting them to go back here. And honestly, in the following position, we might have bishop to g5. But they do capture. And I think we have to capture like this. Here, I'm not seeing any immediate threats. They can't push their pawn because we would just capture. So let's not waste any time here. And here they might take our pawn on e5. Could we attack this pawn here? I'm not seeing any way of doing so. We can't fianchetto here because of this pawn. We could alternatively play like this. I'm considering playing bishop to e2 here to get our castle, but this would probably be met with d3 here. So I think we might have to kick their knight out first, which I think we'll do by pushing this pawn. And then we could prepare a fianchetto instead. Let's just make sure they don't have any good squares. None of those squares work, so we will just go ahead and hit their knight. I didn't want to play our bishop up to f4. That might have been the better move, but after... yeah, it might have actually been better because... now, honestly, we would have dislodged their pawn if they defended with this, but they would have reinforced their passed d-pawn. And here I think we want to take away the d3 square to lock down any mobility for this pawn. And bishop to d3 is what I'm looking at. This doesn't quite justify our f4 move just now, but I think we could still play with a pawn structure like this. So let's just go ahead and prepare our castle and take away any threats of them pushing their pawn. Here I'm expecting them to develop their king side. We might see a move like this, or potentially they might just jump in with their knight here. If they go knight f6 here, we are covering all the crucial jumps here, so I'm not all that worried. Do they have any threats with their queen? They might go on ahead and check us. After which I think a simple queen to e2 would do the trick. It should be okay, I think. This knight can't really jump in anywhere either. They might try to go for a maneuver like this, but I'm not seeing any real threats here at least. Our opponent might just castle queenside, but they proceed on with this knight move here. And here I think we'll castle. This will allow us to move our rook into e1 and pressure their king before they get to castle. I'm just going to look for any tactics in the position straight away, but I'm not really seeing any. So let's proceed like this. So I'm noticing I forgot to look at our opponent today. They're called Plawaptika from Poland, right now from Austria, sorry. I somehow got the flags confused. Honestly, I'm looking at this kind of a maneuver, hitting their pawn on d4. Their last move prepares castling, but after this we are not really threatening their bishop, because it's defended by the knight and by the queen here. I'm looking for any quicker threats in this position, but I'm not really seeing any. So let's go ahead and prepare this development that allows us to target their weak pawn. I'm not seeing any options for sacking here. They wouldn't gain anything from doing so. A6 prepares, or not really prepares it. This allows us from playing b5 and dislodging their knight. And here I think we might just go ahead and even develop our knight over to f3 afterwards. But first of all, I think we'll go ahead and put our bishop here on b2. I keep on looking for tactics here, but I'm not really seeing any with the configuration of the pieces here, so let's just develop normally. I'm expecting a kingside castle, after which I think we'll just proceed with our plans. We will have to play g3 soon, perhaps, to defend this pawn, as our bishop just left its defense here. This pawn still has quite a... I think it's still important because it takes away the square from our opponent's knight, because our bishop and d3 is disallowing their pawn from advancing. We either go to f3 here or to b3 with our knight, but either way I think this knight maneuver is going to be pretty good. So let's go ahead and play like this. I'm curious as to where we would want our queen to go here though. I'm looking at the space on the squares like a4 for example, or up here, but I'm not really seeing anything I'm all that happy with. We might just go ahead and play our queen up to d2 even. Our opponent plays their bishop up again. This does block their queen from defending here, though. That doesn't really do a lot straight away, but if they don't move their bishop, we might be happy to see this movement. Well, this move is going to happen either way, our g3 move, so we might as well play it now, as we don't have any other good defense for our pawn. So let's just see our opponent doesn't have anything tricky here, because they could look to break our structure apart, but I'm not seeing any follow-up. Now this pawn on h3 is a bit weak, but we might push it up to h5 at any point. I'm expecting our opponent to probably move their queen and then connect their rooks and try to double up on the e-file. I'm noticing our control of the e2 square is not all that great in the case of us moving our bishop. So they might go for a second rank infiltration at some point, but our knight on f3 should at least cover our first rank. I'm curious as to where we should strike here, but my intuition tells me to play against this pawn here for now at least, because they can't really defend it with their knight being on c6. And our b4 move disallows our opponent from playing c5 either way, so this pawn is going to stick out like a sore thumb. But it's not like we don't have any weaknesses of our own here though, because we do have to deal with this slightly awkward structure. Luckily, we have traded off our opponent's light squared bishop, so they can't abuse our light squares along this diagonal, at least. The bishop pair here might come in handy long term, but we'll have to see what happens. We do have to make a decision here, though, as to whether we want our knight on b3 or f3. So which repositioning maneuvers could we see afterwards here? I'm noticing on b3 we have the benefit of being able to jump into a5 here, hitting this pawn for example. We're moving into c5, but considering our king's current lack of safety, I think I want another piece on the king's side. So let's play like this first. And here I'm noticing I played a bit too quickly, dropping our h-pawn. But in return, if our opponent does capture it, we grab their center pawn in response. But then they could come up here with their knight, and they might have a checkmate threat. So this might just be a blunder, we'll have to see. How about we reverse the move order a bit here and look at this. And then this is no longer a mate threat, because we could cover like this. So I think we might have to capture with our bishop here. Allowing this queen captures h3 move is awkward at best, but we'll have to find some way of dealing with it. I'm also looking at knight to g5, but their queen could just move along this file here. Probably in this case, I think to h5, and then we can't hit their pawn here. We couldn't hit it either way, I'm noticing, with this knight being here. Let's see what happens if they capture here. We could just jump on back. So I think we have to capture with our bishop here and not the knight at least. Because this would be losing for us. This knight is going to be important. So let's go on ahead like this. If our opponent does play knight to knight to g4 here, we might have to trade off our light squared bishop to get rid of it. And if we get this position, I would have liked being able to just capture with our queen here, but that's no good. After this, we go, as we planned, over to f3 with our knight. And here I think it's important to note us having our knight here on the king side rather instead of the queen side was quite important in the end. This move though makes me a bit curious. It seems our opponent intends to sack here, presumably on this square even. But here though we might have queen to f3. I was looking at bishop to e2 here, but that doesn't really defend any of this, so that's not quite what I'm looking for, I think. We don't have this move. Let's play as safely as possible here, I think, with queen to f3. Yeah, I don't want to spend any more time here. Knight to f3 might have been safe as well, but I'm not quite sure. Honestly, this was probably a mistake, as they can capture here and we can't recapture because of our queen being undefended. But if they capture here, we might have this move. And then we might be in a good spot. And if they capture with their bishop, we still have this move, I think. They can't move up with their queen. And they can't move here. If they capture with their bishop here, I think this traps their queen. I'm not seeing their follow-up there, at least. This would lose to this. This diagonal would be cut off. They can't capture. But they played this move, which that's an interesting move actually. But here we might have queen to d2. The reason this move is good, I think, is because it disallows us from playing this. Our opponent would capture here. Honestly, we might have this move here. Checking their king, and then we could pick up this pawn. I think I like this idea. And we could pick up their pawn with the bishop, hitting their queen. Which might mean we have trapped their queen now. After they move their king, and we play this, where would they move their queen? Nothing seems to work here, so I think we might have accidentally stumbled into a really good line for us. This would force them to capture here, and I think we would capture with our queen, simply to defend any attacks here and force a trade. So let's have a look at this first. I think this forces them to trade in a way that favors us. This might still allow them to sack something here, perhaps. Or honestly, we should just force the queen trade as we are up material now after this trade, I think. This should force the queen trade as they still can't move their queen out. And then we go on ahead and recapture. So we're going to have this followed by this. And then we could go on ahead and just get our rooks into the game on the D and E files. And I think we should be pretty happy here. Their bishop can't really infiltrate our position. They might be able to drop back and go the long way around here, but I think that might be a bit too slow. Our opponent finds an interesting move, one which I did not see at all. This might allow us to just play like this though. If we capture their knight, they don't really have a perpetual check, and if they capture we get this. This doesn't work, so we are probably going to see this resulting position, which I think favors us by quite a lot. So I think our opponent might be collapsing here unless I'm missing something perhaps obvious, but at least something I'm not seeing right now. So at the end of the line here we should be up quite a lot of material. They hit this pawn. Does this force a queen trade? I think it does. They are going to get this pawn, but we have so much material, such a big material disadvantage rather. I'm not seeing how they come back from this. We are essentially up a full rook for a pawn here. And as the queens are off the board here, our king's safety is not that important. They do find a creative way of keeping their queen, but this move threatens checkmate. So after this, they could try to defend in this way, but then they would be on the defensive all of a sudden, and we would have thwarted their attack, which I'm liking. This is what I'm looking for. Simply because this traps their queen, I think. Now we'll just go ahead and play quickly here and see what happens. Now we will proceed with getting our rooks into the game. Honestly, I didn't notice this diagonal opened up. But either way here, our king is safe, so our material advantage should be so large, honestly, this should be trivial. They hit our pawn. And here I think this simple move it's not as simple as I hoped for it to be. We do need to play our moves nonetheless. And after this, we don't want to lose our knight here. We'll have to move quickly. This pawn is lost. That's life. We just need to get our rooks active here. I didn't want to move our rook straight away, as they had this move forking our pieces, and then we couldn't defend our knight with our queen. I'm expecting this. They might move their rook as well for the capture. But I think we should have enough counterplay, or at least that's what I'm hoping for here. They go for this. And here we just have to move quickly. They can't really capture, as we still have a somewhat solid position. I think solid will be overstating this quite a bit, but at least I think we are not in any immediate danger. This, and we just block with our queen. And now I think we want to double our rooks here. If we do find a way of getting the queens off the board, then that's going to be our way of playing here, because they still have an option of a potential perpetual check here. So let's have a look here. So now we may have to make a decision here. Do we want to drop this pawn? I don't necessarily think we need to. We might play like this. But they're hitting this pawn as well. We might as well just push it. And now we go back into the corner. And I'm struggling to see how our opponent is going to win, but they might pose some difficulties in other ways here. Like this, for example. But then we could hit their queen in response. Which might have been a horrible move. Now we have to trade like this. And we might even be looking at a draw here. I blundered again. That sucks, but we'll have to look at a way of playing this for something other than a draw, which it seems our opponent is forcing a perpetual check here. This is unfortunate. It appears this is how it will be today. They don't go for the perpetual check. So let's play. We might have some ideas of counterplay here. But honestly, I'm not quite seeing this, because it would break our coordination apart. But this might be an idea. I think we'll go ahead and double our rooks. It seems as though our opponent is playing for a win here, which might cause them to make some mistakes. Hopefully. This would force this. And here we might just go on ahead and pressure our opponent down this file. They might have a3 here, or queen takes a3 or rather. This play here on the H file might have been a bit bad, as it might disallow us from doing all that much against their king because of this G-pawn covering the squares. This move here at least defends our pawn on b4. At some point here our opponent might try to trade their queen for our two rooks. And then they might have a winning endgame afterwards. I think objectively here we should probably be losing. But if we... Yeah, I think this is an objective draw here, or draw, sorry, an objective loss, but we might induce some mistakes from our opponent. Here at least, I think we might want to get our king over to our pawns here, if they allow us to. So we might have an option of advancing our pawns with our king in any endgame. They seem to be intent on checking us. Here I don't think we want to go here, because this would allow the simplification, which they would benefit a lot from. So let's move on to this square, so they can't fork this rook and our king. I think we'll just stay on light squares to avoid getting forked here. Just moving around like this, because once we step onto dark squares we might end up getting forked, as we mentioned. This might allow this, so we should not go here. We'll go back to b1. But I did miss, they forced this simplification already. And this is simply a losing endgame. We have 2 minutes here, so let's calculate this quickly. They are 4 moves away from promoting. This king to h2 move would allow them to just walk their pawn up. What happens here if we go e3? I'm looking at e3 here simply because it might allow us some chance of coming up. This seems to take a lot of tempi. This is going to be followed by king to h2, and then they will advance. I think this might be the most challenging move. And here, if our opponent plays king to h2, then they have probably won the game. Even g3 here might... Now, g3 doesn't necessarily win. This is a loss now, as they are going to get a queen and we have no counterplay. And I don't think I want to draw this game out when it's an obvious loss for both. Both players can see it's a loss. So we will go ahead and resign here and look at the analysis. Thanks a lot for the game. I see we made a lot of mistakes today, so I'm curious as to how we should have played differently. Considering we were up 5 points of material at one point, we should probably have had a comfortable win. But I guess I buckled a bit under the time pressure today. Let's jump ahead into the game review. I'm also curious to look here as to how we should have played differently in the opening perhaps. It seems we played the correct moves here in response, and everything here was actually theory. So we had a massive advantage out of the opening, but here we made an inaccuracy. An immediate b4 was apparently better. But we played that now. King to g2 makes a lot of sense, because it would have avoided this complication. We got into this position, and here we were actually lost. We should have played like this, presumably knocking their knight away from the defense of this pawn. No forwards knight move seems to be good, so they might have went back here and we would have captured. And we would have went on our merry way, playing the game from a better position. Here they made a mistake. This is unfortunate. I didn't see this at the time. It took me a couple of minutes to notice this idea of trapping their queen. But we could have played this in this position already. We didn't, and we got into this position, which was still decisively winning. And here we should have just won the game. This was probably a better approach than what we went for. And then queen takes f4 was actually best, but if they avoided the queen trade, let's say they tried to go here, then knight to g5. It seems a lot of moves would have been good here, and in this position we were essentially safe. I'm a bit annoyed with myself that I didn't find this continuation, but even here we had a mate in 2 that I missed. This is honestly somewhat inexcusable. But, well, it is how it is, and we played inaccurately here. We will just go ahead and learn from our mistakes if possible. At this point we were still decisively winning, but the position was not as trivial because we didn't have any defenses in front of our king. This allowed this move, which apparently won the game on the spot because this was difficult to deal with, and we might have had to trade our king for their queen. Sorry, our queen for their rook instead. And this, I think, just settled our fate. I'm curious as to whether we had any chances of coming back from this position, but I'm not really seeing any. Yeah, taking the H file seems to have been a mistake. And here I don't think we had any chances of winning. We played a few more moves and resigned, as they would have gotten their queen in just a few moves. Well, this is an unfortunate game for today, but I'm honestly happy we got such a good position out of an unknown opening, namely the Albin counter gambit. So now we at least know some of the theory there and can be more confident in our moves next time facing this opening, so we might have more time to look at moves in the middle game. Well, either way, that's our game for today, guys. Thanks a lot for watching, and I hope to see you all tomorrow. Bye bye.